What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel. It occurs to me it's been a minute since we've done a build that wasn't my personal rig on the channel. So that's what I have for you all today. I'm gonna be building my friend's living room computer. And here are all of the parts. So the case for this is, as you can see, Thermaltake Core V1. This is an older chassis, but I've always kind of wanted to build in this. And as it turns out, we were both kind of leaning in the same direction given his spatial limitations and everything. So I think this is gonna work out pretty well for him. Now we are going with an AMD platform. This is a B450 motherboard, the MSI B450i Gaming Plus AC. This was not my personal first choice for this build, but we weren't trying to really break the bank here, and this will still be fine for the processor that we chose for it. It does of course have built-in Wi-Fi support and a minimal amount of RGB lighting on this, which is was sort of central to the whole theme of this build. There's really not much of anything here that has any sort of lighting on it. Slotting into this motherboard is a Ryzen 5 2600. Nothing super sexy, but in terms of sort of bang for the buck, the Ryzen 5 2600 remains one of the strongest processors out there. Second really only to, I would personally say, like a Ryzen 7 2700 or 2700X if you can find one on sale. That might be a slightly better value. But the main focus of this particular computer is going to be dem games, so you don't really need a whole lot of CPU there, and this will do just fine. Cooling this Ryzen 5 2600 is a recent recommendation of mine, the AMD Wraith Max. This does have a small ring of RGB lighting around the top of the heatsink, but it's not it's not like super blingy, right? It's not going to completely illuminate the inside of the case. And as we've seen earlier, at least with a stock 2600, this is more than enough heatsink. Now for the power supply, this is sort of uncharted waters for me. Hopefully not water, because that would be terrible here. But this is a Thermaltake Smart M 750 watt power supply. It's an 80 plus bronze unit. And again, I've never really built a computer with one of these before, so this should be fun. For memory, we've gone with a 2x8 gigabyte kit of T-Force Vulkan Z DIMMs. These are rated at 3000 megahertz with CAS latency 16. Not really the tightest timings ever. We'll see if we can do anything about that with the BIOS on this motherboard. I'm admittedly not hopeful, but I'm still gonna try because I'm stubborn like that. And the single hard drive for this computer is a Team Group MS30 SSD. This is a 1 terabyte SSD. It is only SATA 3 6 gig, but again, this is just a gaming rig, and honestly, this is plenty enough for my friend's needs. All right, so those are the parts. Let's get to building. All right, so no mic right now, just hit a stopping point. This is something that I just wanted to point out that I do with basically every single build that I work on. I do a post check outside of the case just to make sure that all the hardware is working before I move forward with the build, because it's obviously going to be easier for me to reach and diagnose things with all the components running outside of the case than with everything all cable managed and nice and tidy inside. Now the other thing that I do here is I will go into the BIOS and I will check to make sure that everything is being registered as it should. And we can see here we are registering all 16 gigs of RAM, we are registering our hard drive, we are registering the processor. So if we go into CPU specifications, we can see that yes, we do in fact have a Ryzen 5 2600 6-core CPU in there. Everything is looking solid. Even coming over here to hardware monitor and we look at processor temps, we're not just blatantly overheating or something like that, so we are making good contact with the heatsink. Now the eagle eye amongst you have probably noticed this is the 7970 from my recent video. The only reason I'm even using this right now is because the even more astute among you have noticed I didn't specify what graphics card this build is going to be using. That's because the card's not here yet. That shows up tomorrow, so yeah, now that I've confirmed that all of this is going according to plan so far, I'm going to go ahead and pack it up for the night and wait for that card to show up so I can finish the build.
And she's Dunsky.
So, you'll notice I have all the side panels off right now. That's because I'm going to be discussing some of the finer points of my building experience overall with this chassis. But the first thing I want to address is the graphics card. Yes, this build is actually going to be using a 1080 Ti paired with an R5 2600. This is specifically a reference 1080 Ti, at least as far as the PCB is concerned. It is, of course, using their extremely good ACX cooler here. Man, I'll tell you, that's like a perfect fit inside this case. I'm actually glad that they designed it to allow the leading edge of a graphics card here to sort of poke out the front, because if you couldn't, you would be really restricted with the length of your GPU here. As it is, you couldn't really even do even a 2.5 slot card. You'd be pressed right up against one of these side panels. And while even though they do have the perforated side on them that the fans can breathe through, you still run a possibility of the fans just not being able to spin at all because it's so damn close to the panel. So yeah, you're definitely restricted to 2-slot tall graphics solutions in this case. Now, probably the biggest annoyance with the actual build process was getting the power supply installed. It's not that it's in a bad spot necessarily, but the best way to comfortably get to it is to be able to take off the floor panel here, because all of the panels on all sides, with the exception of the rear of this chassis, can come off in case you're not familiar with it. The weird thing about it though is that unless you take off the hard drive cages on this side of the chassis, there's really no way to get the power supply down into the basement otherwise. And even then, it's still going to be kind of a tight fit depending on how tall your power supply is. So yeah, it's a little annoying having to sort of finagle the case and the power supply and hold everything in a certain way so you can get all the threads you know, in place properly. Really, aside from that though, the only thing that was kind of tough here was cable management, because they're really, let me see if I can get this more in the light here. There we go. There's really no cable tie down points anywhere on the inside of this chassis. I guess they just sort of expected you to, I don't know, figure it out on your own with the cables. So that's what I wound up doing. I actually wound up keeping the hard drive caddies in place for exactly that reason, because there's enough room behind the caddies that with the cables I'm using, which admittedly aren't very many, there's enough room for you to sort of tuck the cables away behind the caddy and not really impact your ability to reach anything else in the chassis. And then of course, as far as front IO cabling is concerned, your individual mileage is always going to vary with something like this. But what I was able to do was just get this sort of, you know, tidily bundled up and, you know, moved over to the side of the power supply basement here. So you really don't see those cables when the panels are on, and everything just sort of routes neatly and cleanly where it needs to. And because the front panel connectors for this motherboard are positioned in this little nook down here, just above where your front panel audio header goes, having a hard time focusing on, but trust me, it's down there. Yeah, the way that cabling runs, it was just kind of, this was literally the only way to do it, but thankfully they give you enough room between the edge of the motherboard tray area and the side panel of the case that you can do that. Now, as far as the PCI Express power cables here, I did wind up tying those at the bottom front edge of the chassis to one of the fan mount locations that's on the little bracket out front here. So basically, this cable is set up in such a way that when I unplug this and send the rest of the build off to be shipped, first of all, the package is going to be lighter. Secondly, when my friend gets his 1080 Ti in here, all he has to do is loop this cable back around and plug it into the new card and it'll be set. But yeah, in general, the build turned out really cleanly in my humble opinion. And I gotta tell you, at idle, with this card maintaining the stock fan profile of having 0 RPM mode when you're sitting at idle. Now, while I know that's not the most scientific test ever, this is a ridiculously quiet system at idle. So we're done with the build, but we're not done with the build yet. There is going to be some follow-up content surrounding this computer and some follow-up testing surrounding some other graphics cards and comparing some of the data we get from this machine to my personal computer that I use for all of my editing and my personal gaming stuff. So stay tuned for that. Toss the video a thumbs up if you like what you saw. Get subscribed and hit that bell icon for more content. I'll catch you all next time. So take it easy.